In this episode of GYDA Talks, Robert talks to Antoinette Dale-Henderson. Antoinette is a globally recognised expert and speaker on leadership and gravitas. In 2015, she published her first book, Leading with Gravitas, which was based on 3 years' research into 6 qualities shared by successful leaders. 4 years later, Antoinette's new book, Power Up, has just launched. The book focuses on real-world challenges faced by women and aims to empower ambitious women to unleash their potential and have their voice heard.
And hello and welcome to the GYDA Initiative Talks with today. Delighted to say we've got Antoinette Dale-Henderson. Antoinette, I first met, 4, 5, 6 years ago. She's worked with me with our cocktail bar friends. She's worked with me with some amazing digital agencies. But hello and welcome to you, Antoinette.
Hi, Robert. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. So let's. I've got so many questions here. I'm not even sure where to start. But could we just start off with the kind of obvious one? Could you just give us a quick intro, Antoinette, of what you're known for and how people might have heard of you?
Absolutely. I run an organisation called the Gravitas Program, and what we do is we go into corporate organisations and run programs that help managers and leaders communicate with confidence, get taken seriously, and generally power up their career. Right. I've got a background in comms, so I spent 16 years working in agency land, so I've lived the life that many of your viewers have lived. And and then I set my business up about 12 years ago to focus specifically on gravitas.
So what was the journey from agency to doing what you're doing now?
Well, I absolutely loved agency work and agency life. I spent a lot of time thinking about strategically how to promote brands, how to come up with creative ideas to differentiate them, and I love that creative process. And I also hugely enjoyed working with teams and helping people grow and develop, pitching, the whole buzz of that. I adored the whole career. And then for me, after I had my second daughter 12 years ago, I thought, do I want to go back to that world? And that world had moved beyond the doing. I was a director at the time, and I was spending a lot of time in P&L meetings, a lot of time on planes. And I just, I felt like I wanted to do something different. And so I decided to follow my heart and think about what did I love doing the most. And like I say, it was about helping people grow and progress and develop. And so that's how I set up the company, first of all. That was the inspiration.
Right. So I think we first started talking seriously when I came across the Gravitas book. And Gravitas has always been a word that I love the word because Gravitas is about, it's about a bit of depth and a bit of authority and a bit of control. I think we all when we're young, we can't figure out why we can't get traction, and then suddenly, in my case, grey hair, and suddenly a bit more experience that people start listening to. But that whole gravitas stuff, why? Could you just explain what you mean by gravitas? Could you explain, specifically, for agency owner, agency founders, why is that gravitas concept so important?
Well, that word gravitas is very personal to me because it was a word that was used a lot back in the PR days, and it was very much, it felt like it was a passport to senior positions. And I remember when I was 27 years old and it was appraisal time, and I sat down with my boss, Neil, and he said, look, Antoinette, you're doing brilliantly, you're ticking all the boxes, and all I wanted, that's it, exactly, all I wanted was to get promoted to account director. And I thought I was ready, and I said, yeah, you're doing brilliantly, ticking all the boxes on the job description. And I was like, I know, because I've kind of looked at the job description and the one after that, but the word that's coming, it's like, but. However, he'd probably been on some management training by that point, so he knew not to use the word but, use the word however instead. And it was like, well, however, you know, what you're missing, what you need to be able to progress into a leadership position is gravitas. And it felt like a real kick in the teeth. You know, I knew that I was doing all the right things, but I realized that there was something missing around how I was showing up. You know, whether it was in client meetings or whether it's leading teams or whatever it was, there's something not quite there. Trouble was, I didn't get told what gravitas was or how to go about developing it. And so, you know, I eventually did get promoted and made my way up and all that good stuff. So then it was then when I started coaching senior leaders in corporate organizations, and it was one day where I had 3 coaching sessions, one after another, in an investment bank. And each of those 3 times, 3 people came in and they said, look, Antoinette, I'm being told I need to work on my gravitas. Do you have any idea what that is? So I was like, it's a sign. I need to go out and figure out what it is. So
2 questions for you. So what is it? And if you can, how can you accelerate it?
Well, I believe absolutely that you can accelerate it. I believe that you don't need to wait until you said it, you know, until you've got the silver hair, you know, until you've got that long tenure. It can be accelerated, and ultimately it is about defining what it is. And so what it is I feel like it has evolved. Whereas gravitas back in the day was very kind of almost like Mad Men, you know, that sort of aloof, distant, you know, from on high, I have this thing called gravitas. And you minions down there, you need to listen to me. Well, we all know that kind of leadership just does not work anymore. And these days it's far more about connection. And so gravitas it's almost like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. Someone who you think has got gravitas, I might not. And we all have our own view of what it is. And so ultimately, when it comes to this program, it's a very personal and transformational journey, because ultimately to have gravitas, what you need is you need to be able to know and understand and accept yourself. So you've got that inner certainty and surety and groundedness. You have to start with that. And then it's also about how do you then communicate with confidence with the outside world. And so what I did to try and make it acceleratable and doable is to create this model which broke down gravitas in 6 different components, and what we do, whether it's on the program or one-to-one coaching or when it's speaking at events, it's let's break it down and let's look at the 6 different components, and then you can accelerate it.
And yeah, let's go down this route, because it's got a bit of a spike to it. Is gravitas different in men and in women?
I believe the gravitas is different in everyone. And although I do quite a lot of work with women, and I run women's programs, and I'm invited in to go and talk, you know, as part of women's networks and things like that, I've always worked with men and women. And I think it's what's a red herring is to think, well, men need to be like this and women need to be like that, and let's separate people out. I think when it comes to the expression of gravitas, one of the key ways of expressing your gravitas is through your voice. You know, we communicate visually, but also through the sound of our voice.
Yeah.
And of course, men will have a deeper voice generally.
And I was aware that I said to you gravitas, because I was gravitas.
Gravitas. Yeah. So, and we all know, you know, Margaret Thatcher, great example. She was taught to speak the way that she did. When she started, she had quite a squeaky voice, and it was all up here. Whereas when it comes to gravitas, it's about bringing your voice down. And so particularly when we're under threat, what we tend to do is we tend to start breathing quite shallowly. The adrenaline starts pumping and the voice kind of goes all up here, and women will go more squeaky. And so it's about, if you want to get taken seriously and command respect and handle yourself, particularly when under threat, it's about bringing it back down and making sure you're breathing deeply, which will, of course, then help with the fight or flight response that happens when you're under threat anyway.
But that's, in some senses, the outward semblance of it. That's like almost, dare I say, I'm sure we'll come back to it later on. It's almost like the power move, and it's like almost like a tactic, as opposed to something a bit more strategic, if I can use that word. So you've got your 6, maybe 30 seconds just going through what those six concepts are, just right, because I want to talk about so much. I also want to talk about the new book. So just very quickly run through what those headings are, just to give people listening a sense of what the Gravitas model is.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's based on a wheel, and what you can do is you can look at per each segment of that circular wheel is to think about where are you now and where do you want to be. Okay. So in a nutshell, the 3 internal components of Gravitas are, firstly, self-awareness.
Yeah.
That's the foundation and the building block of everything. If you know yourself and you accept yourself, warts and all, then that will lead to more certainty and more groundedness. So self-awareness first. Secondly, expertise. And we have to be continually growing and developing and progressing, otherwise we start sliding backwards, particularly in this hugely competitive and fast-paced world. But it's not only about being an expert in what you do, it's about being able to articulate it as well. So when someone says to you, what do you do? Or, what are you up to lately? You don't just do that usual boring rocket pitch that, you can show it, you can evidence it. So expertise. And then the third component is authenticity. Now, authenticity, that word, if you stick it into Google, my goodness, you'll get so many hits back. It's hugely overused, but it's tremendously important. And it's about how do you show up as yourself in the way that if you do, then people are going to trust you more. People are going to want to be around you more. But it's not about just letting it all hang out. Yeah. I think we've all worked with leaders who are authentically actually rubbish at what they do and crashing around, upsetting everyone the whole time. I talk about managed authenticity.
Good. Okay. So those are the
internal ones. And then the 3 external ones, this is how you, so going back to what you said about there's the outward sign of it, or the strategic part. The strategic part is what's on the inside. You have to start with that. And then externally, the 3 components are presence. And again, that's quite an indefinable, intangible term, but when someone's got presence and when they don't.
Yeah.
Well, if they don't, then you don't notice them. So it's presence is about how you attract attention to yourself through how you hold yourself, what you do with your voice, your breathing, all of that good stuff. Yeah. Your dress as well. So presence is really important because you need to be noticed. Yeah. Then there's connection. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the old-fashioned version of Gravitas was very aloof and from on high. To be any kind of leader or manager or be successful in any kind of business, you have to be able to build rapport and have connection with people. And so that's about how you do that, but also how you develop your network. And then the 6th component of the wheel is projection. And that's about when you're on a big stage in front of a huge audience, how do you amplify your message? How do you get yourself across? When you're speaking on stage at Google and, the executives at the back of the room, how do you get to them as well as get to the ones in the front row? So the projection is important for that, but it's also really important in challenging situations. And so if you're in a meeting, for example, and you've got a whole load of people over there that are having a conversation or someone rambling over there, and, how do you get through, how do you cut through that? So that's when projection is really important.
Okay, good. Love it. So, quick question: how much of your work is I'm going to do it. Women only, opposed to general work.
Well, it's only last year that I developed the Gravitas for Women program and started going and talking to organisations about women in leadership. And it's only last year that I had the inspiration for the new book, which is specifically for women. Up until that point, it had always been mixed. And that was in response to clients saying to me, you know, what are you doing specifically for women? And women saying to me, you know, can you create something that I can come along to myself? But in answer to your question, I'd say now probably 60-40. 60% mixed, 40% women.
Yeah, because there is, I mean, when we've worked with clients together, there is this, I mean, it's not deliberate. Well, it's not deliberate on my part, but it is, oh, this is a very testosterone-filled male world with assertive, dominant people slamming tables and shouting and being rude. Or this is a I'm thinking on the agencies. This is an agency is clearly run by a woman, and it's clearly got a different way of running from the others. So it's kind of, it is always there, and it's actually dishonest. You know, feminists are going to get uptight. It's kind of dishonest to not recognise that different people run organisations in different ways according to their character, and quite often the male testosterone way quite often is different from the other way. But you and I both know several women who run businesses very forcefully. I think I better stop there because I'm starting to dig a hole for myself. So what are the issues facing women as they go into leadership?
Well, I think it's a really interesting time, and I think that key issues facing women now are evolving. And it's a very different world since 2017, since the Me Too movement and since gender pay gap reporting. A gap has been left wide open where organisations are having to create environments that are equal and provide opportunities for everyone to fulfil their potential. They're having to look very carefully at their gender quota and at each of the different levels and think about what they can do to make the environment more conducive for women as they progress up the ladder. And there are a number of specific factors that women in leadership do face before they even reach that leadership position. You know, that goes back to society's conditionings and the unconscious or conscious biases around what we think about, you know, what should be traditionally a male role or what should be a female role, right there. And even though organisations are being more and more careful around how they recruit and to keep that unbiased, you know, that still creeps through. And then when it comes to interviews, I've spoken to a lot of women actually who work in agencies, advertising, marketing, PR. And what they've said to me is when they go into interviews, what they'll do is they'll hide their wedding and their engagement ring because they are concerned that, you know, if the person interviewing them sees that, they might not employ them because they'll be worried that they're going to take some time out to have children. I was horrified when I heard that. I thought the world had moved on slightly since when I was at that level. And so even then, when a woman joins an organisation, research does show that men are more likely to put themselves forward for projects if they feel like they almost fulfil the criteria. Whereas us women, we want to feel like we've got it all down before we want to put ourselves in that position. And so we're less likely to take risks, which might from a neuroscience perspective be to do with testosterone, you know, given there might be, you know, some biological areas that are in the way. But, you know, in addition to that, there's the whole conditioning around, as girls grow up, they get told to be quiet, to sit still, to not make a noise, whereas boys are running around playing guns and, you know, being crazy. And so we're less likely as women to feel comfortable sharing our voice because of how we've been conditioned as we grow up. And so there's a whole load of stuff. There are roadblocks in the way in terms of career. There are challenges that we almost put in our own way as women when it comes to mindset and confidence. But then there's also, you know, the way organisations are set up, and you know, are they set up in such a way that make it okay for women to progress and easy for women to progress or not? And I talk to a lot of women who say, well, actually, it's too hard. It's too hard, and you know, I'm going to stay at the level that I'm at because the way that my home life is set up, you know, I can't do it.
Yeah, and I certainly witness. So I do a lot of work with Google. They've got a 50-50 split. One of the agencies I do a lot of work with, Push, really well-known agency. They've got a 50-50 split. And organisations are different. I do think, as I look over how organisations behaved 10 or 15 years ago and how they are now, it is a different world. It's certainly not finished. I've got 2 daughters, so I have a vested interest. But things are moving, and behaviour that was appropriate 5 or 10 years ago isn't appropriate. And I think opportunities have changed, and I think the whole thing is, you know, exciting times, really, really exciting times. Okay, let's as I said, we've got loads and loads of questions. I want to ask you about the new book. I mean, do we need, so firstly, do we need another book? Do we need another book? And if we do need another book, how is this different from the rest? And title.
Okay, well, the new book, this isn't the actual cover, this is a postcard version of the cover. But the title is Power Up.
Yep.
The Smart Woman's Guide to Unleashing Her Potential. And of course, I believe we need another book, although otherwise I wouldn't have spent all these hours over the past year writing it.
So why do we need another book?
Well, as I was saying, you know, the world is changing. There's this big gap that's been opened up since Me Too, with gender pay gap reporting and all of that stuff. And while women are waiting for organisations to catch up and create the most conducive environment for them to succeed, I believe that they need to step forward and they need to learn how to ask for what they want and get what they deserve. And so from my perspective, I think there's a lot of calling out the issues. There's a lot of talking about the challenges, but what is missing is that it's providing practical guidance on specifically what women can do to get there. Mm-hmm. And so just like my first book, Leading with Gravitas, it's really practical, it's easily dip in and outable, and you know, the different chapters that are relevant to different challenges that women face. And beyond that though, I think that although the book is for women, the whole concept for me, this whole concept of powering up, is for everybody. And so back to what we were saying about, it shouldn't be about men have the testosterone, so they're the ones who are go-getters, you know, they run organisations like this, and women on the other hand, you know, they're softer, they've got the softer power, and they've got the emotional intelligence and the intuition, and you know, they'll do it in a more touchy-feely way, you know, and almost as though that's lesser. For me, I think we need to be able to, all of us, get comfortable with that whole power spectrum and be able to access and use it. Because when leaders develop emotional intelligence, when they tune in to their intuition, when they get brilliant at influencing and just connecting and creating rapport, amazing stuff happens. And then, you know, when push comes to shove, when people know how to use their voice and channel their anger and use their emotions appropriately and speak with force when they need to, amazing things happen too. So it's about understanding that whole spectrum and learning how to access the whole range when you need to.
So you're talk. Are you talking about a new power dynamic? Are you talking about? Are you talking? Go on, tell me more.
I am talking about a new power dynamic. I think that the time is now. I think, well, I mean, look at what's going on in the House of Commons at the moment. Look at what's going on in politics in the world right now. For me, and I'm sure the majority of people would agree, the display that's going on at a senior level with leaders who we should be looking up to right now, it's an embarrassment. And so we need to just take control of what we can and do it in an honourable way and work together in businesses to keep going. And so it's about how do we do that?
I mean, I don't want to be too time specific, but it does feel that our so-called political leaders and representatives are coming from the dark ages and are progressively less and less connected with what Joe Average is trying to do, what they're trying to do with their husband or their wife or whatever it is. It just feels totally out of touch, totally bonkers. So go on more about the new power dynamic. How does this tie in to someone trying to run a digital agency? How does this tie into someone, a man or a woman, they've got a couple of kids and they're both trying to get back to work and so on? How does it all kind of mesh together?
I think that, okay, let's start with someone running a digital agency. I think it's, so I do work with people at all different levels, and I'm just about to start the 11th year of a graduate training program for an agency. And I love working with those guys, and it's been fascinating over the last 11 years seeing how that graduate level has changed, and how people relate to each other differently. And what I've noticed with that generation, and again, I don't like to put anyone into boxes, but there's a lot more energy and drive and entrepreneurial spirit that I'm noticing, and so where people, it's not necessarily a sense of entitlement, but people want what they want and they are prepared to ask for it and they push themselves forward. And what I notice is with people who are from a different generation, their tendency might be to want to squash that, or to put them back in their box, or to say, well, you have to kind of earn your stripes first. It's not like that, in
I have to earn my stripes. Now you've got to do what I did.
Right. And I think that, there is that tendency to sort of go into almost a sort of controlling parent mode when you're a manager or a leader, when faced with someone who is naturally going to be younger, less experienced than you, and they've got that energy and that verve and that drive. And the tendency could be to want to just squash that. And right there, from a power perspective, that's an interesting power over dynamic that could occur. And at the same time, I think that people who are starting out in their career, and at any level of our career, we're all learning and we're all progressing together. And so I think it's also important for people to appreciate that they don't know everything, and that, the importance of that curiosity. And so when it comes to power, I think it's about, how do you create a culture and an environment where everyone has a voice, everyone has the opportunity to share their views and their experiences and their passions and their thoughts. Because when it comes to creativity, strategic thinking, and understanding what's going on in the marketplace, we need to hear everyone's voice. And so at a practical level, for example, in a brainstorm, you're going to end up with people who've got the loudest voices. They're going to tend to be the ones who are the most extrovert, perhaps the most experienced. But then that little nugget might come from someone who's got the least amount of experience. If they don't get the forum to be able to speak and they don't have their confidence built up from the inside, then they won't. And so I think, that power dynamic is really important, is how can you create a culture where everyone is powerful in the right way? And then it's not about power over, it's about how can we all empower ourselves.
So ironically, or maybe not ironically, one of the jobs of leadership, senior management, is not to kill that enthusiasm and passion, but actually to rather than just say, oh, they're millennials, they're all entitled, to actually go through it a little bit more thoughtfully. I did a really good interview with Dennis Yu from the States, ex-Yahoo, who runs this big organization that trains youngsters, sort of sub 22, sub 23-year-olds. And he says they're not millennials. It's really unhelpful saying that. What they are is they're a bunch of people who really want to get going, and you need to dig deep to understand what motivates them and what they want, and help them understand how they can achieve, and help them, to kind of slow them down in a way and say, yeah, you can have that, but these are the steps we need. So let's help you make those steps to make that happen. And therefore, his argument was, it's our job to enable, it's our job to make it possible for them to achieve their ambitions, as opposed to saying, it's bonkers, they say they want to be directors within 3 years. So it's about, rather than being the parental thing that just says,
right,
you can't be a director until you're 40.
Get back in your box, yeah.
You say, well, there's probably more to being a director than you understand. However, these are things that you can do, and these are things that people look for. So let me help you. Let me give you the tools. Let me give you the facilities. Let's take you on the training so that you can progress. So let's monitor the progress.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's got an agency which is the average age of people in the agency, something like 21 or something, because he's put processes and systems in place as well as that support. So it is possible. And then how does that power dynamic fit? I mean, we kind of alluded to it in terms of how families run, because that's the same thing, really. It's like, there are as many people now where maybe dad is choosing to stay at home rather than going to work, where mum actually wants to continue in her career, and so on and so forth. That's just standard relationships. So how does the power up piece fit in there?
I think it's a really interesting time. I've got 2 daughters as well, same as you, younger, and I think that it's about how can everyone fulfill their potential, and ultimately it's about not thinking that there's one way of doing it, and I do think that many organizations are opening up to that they need to make the environment as conducive as possible for men and women, whatever circumstances they are in. I think what's really important, though, is for particularly women to develop the skills to be able to ask for what they want and what they need and what they deserve. I think traditionally women have felt like they've had to be perfect at work and be perfect at home to almost pretend when they're at work that they don't have a home life, and when they're with their kids pretend that they don't have a work life, and that's not sustainable. So as far as power is concerned, it's about just to keep having those conversations and keep listening, keep having the door open, because it's such a shame, and I've seen this a lot in agency land, where women just, people in general burn out. They kind of get up to a point where they can't do it anymore. And all that talent is wasted.
Yep.
All that potential is lost when that happens. And then when it comes to people who run their own business, there's data, there's statistics that women are less likely to take that leap, jump into the abyss and take the risk. And so women need to be encouraged to do that too. Yeah.
Well, you'll be delighted to hear the stats from the banks are that as a risk, women are much better than men. And that may well be, it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy that the only women who feel really, really confident actually go to the bank for money, if that makes sense. And therefore, the likelihood of success is much greater than the average male business setup. Does that make sense? Because I think what happens is only the best women feel confident enough to make the jump to go to the bank for money. And therefore, if there's, power curve distribution, they get a better quality of candidate if they're female than male. Also true actually of minority businesses as well. Those that actually join are better than the rest, better than the average. Okay. So you don't know the answer to this because the book's not come out, and we never know what it is that people love about what we produce. So that's one of the intriguing, fascinating, dreadful things about writing a book is you think chapter 1, 3, and 5 are going to be the killers, and then everyone talks about chapters 2, 4, and 6. You go,
right.
But what's your gut feeling about the 2 or 3 things that you think people can go from the book saying, wow, you need to read this book because this is the book that says, what do you think the key takeaways from the book are going to be?
Well, but there are some, so the idea around the new power dynamic, the reason for that is, like I was saying about that whole spectrum, but also it's looking at power in a very different way. So there's been lots of studies into power. The French and Raven study that looked at the 7 different types of power style, from coercive to informational to referent that took it to a certain way. And then Joseph Nye, he looked at power from a political perspective, the difference between soft and hard political power. And so what this book is, it takes it to the next level, and it's about how can you power up throughout all aspects of your life, at all stages. And so there's quite a different take on it. And so again, it's about the 6 different components of powering up and how you can do that. So firstly, there's the power of intuition. And so from a female perspective, of course, they say that female intuition is particularly one of our strengths. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. But ultimately, that power of intuition is fascinating because what women do, is, like we were saying before, is they need to feel like they've got to have all the information in place, all the ducks in the row before they can act or make a decision. What intuition does, which is tuning into your inner wisdom, what that does is it enables you to cut through that overthinking and know how to act and know how to read people. So this age-old power of intuition, I think, is really valuable and different from other forms of power that people might traditionally think of. And people might think intuition is kind of airy-fairy, mumbo-jumbo, pixie stuff, but absolutely not. It's learnt experiences that live in our subconscious, so it's about tuning into those. So that's one key takeaway, is power up your intuition. Another key takeaway is power up your USP. So again, back to what we were saying before around what do you say when someone says to you, what do you do, or what are you up to? You don't just kind of revert into this kind of mumbled elevator pitch or just say, oh, I'm really busy, like most people do.
Or that I'm just a mum. I mean, which is like, oh, I'm just an accountant. It's like,
right. Yeah, please.
Just.
So it's The power of your USP is being able to have a set of answers ready in your back pocket. So when someone asks you what you do, you've got a compelling, exciting and interesting and attractive answer based on what you do best. Yep. And so that's ultimately how you tell stories about what you do. So the power of your USP, hugely, hugely important in business, whether you run your own business or whether you work within an organization or lead it. The power of relationships, and we've touched on that quite a bit, and it's so much. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And you know, we met at a networking lunch about, as you say, 5 years ago.
Your memory's better than mine. Yes.
We sat next to each other at lunch, and so you know, then had a connection, and then ended up, you know, here we are all these years later, together, and so. Those real connections, those real relationships are more important, more powerful than ever before, because so much connection is now online, and with businesses being global, so much of communication happening through a screen, which is fine, but you know, there's nothing more important than spending time developing those relationships. And I know that I'm preaching to the converted there.
Seeing the whites of the eyes, or the reds of the eyes, depends.
So there's the power of relationships. And then I think one of the most important ones, in terms of which chapter is going to sell and work the most, is the power of your voice. And that's not just your spoken voice, it's your message, it's your what you're about, it's going out there and asking for what you want. It's having the confidence to express yourself. It's not rambling and whiffling and waffling. It's having that conciseness. The power of your voice is ultimately the expression of your power. So you need to get brilliant at expressing it.
So we're starting to come up to an end. There's something I have to ask you, which is that TED talk by Amy. The power. I mean, it's firstly, well done her. Great TED talk, and everyone watches it, which is fantastic. And don't even start me on the power of why or anything. Start with why. That'll just send me off my blood pressure in another direction. But there's a lot of people out there saying she's just jumped on a bandwagon and it's just a load of rubbish, and there's no evidence to support power pose and getting results, power pose and thinking you can get results. And also there's another lot of evidence saying actually that's just one thing that may or may not work, and maybe there are other ways of presenting, because otherwise everyone's going to go out doing their power pose. You see it actually, you know, everyone starts their presentations with, it was January 1995. got a set way of presenting. So what's your view on the power pose and Amy and her TED talk?
Well, I think Amy's TED talk is fabulous, and you know, it has had a bit of not so good press lately. There was some noise around the research that she conducted being discredited. I don't think that should take away from the power of what she said in that TED talk. And by the way, she's not the most polished, and she breaks a lot of those rules around public speaking, but you know, she's got some of the biggest viewerships in terms of TED Talks than anywhere else. So she's obviously doing something right. What I do know is that I do incorporate a lot of the physicality, the body language stuff into all the work that I do. And what I do know is that when you get people to compare and contrast how they might normally stand or sit like this, all hunched over or folded in, all like this, you know, the posture that we adopt when we're texting, all and it affects your voice, all this. When you contrast that with someone where you don't have to be standing, when you're sitting or standing tall, you know, that string thing that you were showing before, you know, the actor's technique where you're standing up straight, it opens up your diaphragm, it means that your voice has more resonance, it works. And so this is not about faking it till you make it. It's not about putting your big girl pants on, which I hate, or manning up, or any of those hideous expressions. It's about starting with what's on the inside, but also if you stand or sit in such a way that you're saying, I'm worthy of attention,
Yeah.
it sends a powerful message to your own brain that you've got something important to say, let alone to the people around you. So simply that posture, that straight posture is really, really, really important, makes a massive difference. But there are other little techniques exactly around what you do with your head, you know it. So, and often if people are listening, they're going into approachable mode and they want to kind of rapport and all that. This is fine if you're wanting to draw people in and pull people in. But if you're wanting to communicate a message and stand up to someone, you need to, just this head straight thing makes an immense difference to how you come across and how you feel. So simply that is very valuable. Head straight, posture straight, hands. People say, what do I do with my hands? And often people, they go into this, like, I'm not quite sure, you know, they have their palms up and it's basically saying, I don't quite know. If their voice goes up at the end of the sentence as well, then actually everything that you're saying turns into a question. So then it's about, okay, so how can you make sure that when you're talking, you've got, I'll just quickly show you, you've got your palms, or if you're cutting into a conversation, do it like this, because you're then cutting into a conversation, and then thinking about your voice, we were saying before, your voice going down at the end of the sentence, because then everyone ends up nodding with you.
Can you hoik yourself so we can see you again? We've only got the bottom of your head now. Oh, that's right. Okay, so we probably need to wrap up, which is a great shame. But I guess my final question I always ask it is top tips, golden rules, recommendations from you. What are your kind of top tips you can share with us?
I think the one that I'd like to finish with is, it was a Latin, I'll give you the translation in a minute, but it was on my dad's signet ring, and it's my family crest from back in the day, and the Latin words are non arbitriu popularis ori.
Go on, work. Good. Go on.
Which means do not bend to the will of the people, which I love, because then if you essentially translate it, it means actually be who you want to be and don't give a damn what anyone else thinks. Yeah. And I think that is probably one of the most valuable lessons that we end up learning through life. We waste so much time comparing ourselves to other people, being competitive with other people, when it just takes energy away from forging our own path. So I think that's the most important thing, is be who you want to be, do what you want to do, and don't worry what other people think.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much, Antoinette. As I thought we'd get through tons of stuff, as I thought it would be inspiring, which is absolutely wonderful. At the end of the interview, people will be able to see how they can find out more about Antoinette, her website, contact details, the old book, and of course the new book. So with that note, all I can say is thank you very much for being an absolutely great guest. Thank you very much, Antoinette.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay.
Cheers.